On November the 23rd of 2022, Russian police responding to a missing persons report went to the home of 27-year-old Juliana in St. Petersburg. Officers found the woman's lifeless body wrapped in plastic in a rubble sack, along with construction debris. Her remains exhibited signs of bruising along with what appeared to be a wire mark around her neck. Juliana, who reportedly worked as a hairstylist, had last been seen on CCTV footage getting into the elevator of her apartment building. A man whom local police named as Almaz Ibraev was captured using the same elevator to leave the unit sometime later. It emerged that Juliana had hired 41-year-old Ibraev to do some work around her new apartment. While a motive wasn't officially disclosed for the murder, local law enforcement suspected that Juliana had gone to check on the handyman's work and that she was dissatisfied with how it had turned out. They believed that Ibraev killed her in a fit of rage because he thought that he wouldn't be paid. He bludgeoned her in the head with an unknown heavy object and then fatally strangled her. Following the discovery of Juliana's body, Ibraev was arrested outside a hostel on November the 27th. Number 6. Brian Pennington. On the morning of September the 8th of 2010, handyman Brian Pennington arrived unannounced at the home of Kansas woman Marty Hill, for whom he'd done some work a few weeks prior. Pennington, at the time in his mid-20s, told the woman that he wanted to show her something that needed fixing in the basement. As they reached the bottom of the stairs, Pennington grabbed Hill's throat and choked her unconscious. Hill would remember nothing past that point. Her co-workers called the police after the graphic artist missed a weekly operations meeting later that morning. Hill was found in the basement, covered in blood and clinging to life. Pennington had broken her jaw, fractured her skull, and stabbed her in the neck at least 7 times. Hill was hospitalized and doctors weren't sure whether she'd survive, but after nearly 2 weeks, she was able to speak and named her attacker. Pennington, a married father of 2, was arrested at his home. He had scratches on his face, which he tried to blame on a dog attack. A pair of jeans found at the bottom of his laundry hamper was submitted for DNA analysis and tested positive for Hill's blood. Pennington pleaded guilty to attempted murder in November of 2011, and he was sentenced to 28 years in prison. Aside from scars and other complications from the nearly fatal incident, Hill also struggled to come to grips with not knowing why the handyman had attacked her. The woman was neither abused nor robbed, and Pennington never gave a motive for his horrific actions. Number 5. Shabazz Khan. On October the 1st of 2020, Dr. Saman Mir Sakavi, aged 49, and her teenage daughter, Vian Mangrio, were found dead at their home in Burnley, Lancashire, England, after law enforcement had been called to perform a welfare check. The property was damaged by smoke and fire, but investigators deduced that Saman and Vian had been killed prior to an attempt to set their bodies ablaze, which had only affected the latter's remains. Saman suffered fatal compression to her neck, and her daughter succumbed to asphyxia, and both had been drugged with diazepam prior to their deaths. There was writing on the wall that read, "My mum is evil, this is a COVID house, and help me." It would later be determined to have been a cynical attempt by their killer to place the blame on the teenager. Through CCTV, telephone records, and witness evidence, investigators deduced that they'd been murdered by a handyman, Shabazz Khan. After they'd moved from Pakistan to the UK for Vian's studies, the mother and daughter had relied on 52-year-old Shabazz and his wife, Rabia, for help in building their lives in the UK. Shabazz had done odd jobs and construction work on their home, which he was expected to continue on September the 30th of 2020. On that date, he spiked a smoothie with which he drugged Saman and then killed her, before doing the same to her daughter. When the handyman was arrested at his home on October the 4th, the police searched the property and discovered a bag containing items of gold jewelry, worth tens of thousands of dollars, which belonged to Saman. 45-year-old Rabia was also arrested following several failed attempts of fabricating an alibi for Khan. After initially pleading not guilty, Khan changed his plea towards the end of his trial in October of 2021 and was given a life sentence with a 34-year minimum term. His wife was jailed for 20 months for perverting the course of justice. Number 4. Ezra Gomez. On November the 9th of 2015, New York socialite Lois Coley was found dead in the laundry room of her home on Windswept Farm, a 300-acre estate in North Salem. Investigators discovered a pin from a discharged fire extinguisher near her battered body. An extensive search of the property resulted in the fire extinguisher being found, wrapped in a plastic bag, in a pond. The presence of Colley's DNA on the device led investigators to conclude that the elderly woman had been bludgeoned to death with it. 83-year-old Colley was the wife of a millionaire McDonald's franchisee with roughly 100 restaurants, and she lived in a wealthy area. Ezra Gomez, also known as Victor, had been employed as a day laborer and handyman by the family. He wasn't, however, working for them at the time of Colley's death. The undocumented Guatemalan worker became a suspect after he'd fled to his native country less than a week after the murder, and then to Mexico. The man, at the time in his early 30s, was eventually deported, and the FBI arrested him when he landed in Miami on a connecting flight. It later emerged that Gomez had gone to the farm to ask for money he'd felt he was owed after previously suffering an injury on the job. His lawyer would argue that he hadn't intended to kill anyone but lost control upon running into Colley. Gomez pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and was given the maximum sentence of 22 years to life in prison by a Westchester County court. Number 3. Todd Perkins. In August of 2018, handyman Todd Perkins was embroiled in a dispute with the residents of a property on 365 Santa Fe Drive in Denver, Colorado. He'd recently been fired from his position after repeated arguments with the landlord and tenants. On August the 14th, the disgruntled handyman broke into the fourplex through an apartment. He disconnected gas pipes in the building's basement and left the valves open, filling the room with gas. As reported by the Denver Fire Department, he then poured gasoline on the floor and turned the furnace up to 82 degrees in order to trigger an explosion. It occurred faster than Perkins had expected, and he was caught in the massive blast upon reaching the top of the basement stairs. The handyman was launched through the front wall and into the street, where rescuers found him buried under a pile of rubble. The explosion ravaged the building, injuring 8 people, but no fatalities were reported. 56-year-old Perkins was identified as the prime suspect after the authorities had smelled gasoline on him while he was being taken to the hospital. He faced a plethora of charges that included attempted first-degree murder, arson, and assault. In the trial that followed, Perkins' defense argued that he was being made into a scapegoat and hadn't been responsible for the explosion. He was ultimately found guilty and sentenced to 195 years in prison. Today's topic was requested by Thanatos Prime. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Kelvin James. English handyman Kelvin James and London-based gynecologist Marie Gervil met in April of 2020 when the latter sought help with her guttering. They eventually struck up a romantic relationship that lasted from late 2020 to early 2021. Following their breakup, they maintained a distant friendship that mainly involved text exchanges. In the summer of 2021, James reportedly started struggling with his mental health, and Gervil agreed to meet with him. The man briefly borrowed her Renault Megane, claiming that he needed it for a painting job after his van had broken down. In the following weeks, James began sending Gervil jealous texts asking about her whereabouts and the company she kept after she'd refused to resume their relationship. On November the 16th, Gervil was stopped by the police after leaving a pub in the Up Holland area of Lancashire. She tested negative for a breathalyzer, and officers told her that they'd received an anonymous tip she'd caused a disturbance at the pub. The following day, James messaged Gervil, insisting they meet and telling her that he'd driven past the venue that she'd visited a few days earlier. The traffic stop and the handyman's message caused the 52 to suspect that her ex had been stalking her. She took her Megane to a garage and found that a tracker had been placed on it. Gervil called the police and obtained a restraining order. James was questioned and admitted to installing the tracker without the woman's permission or knowledge and monitoring her movements through an app on his phone. He told the police that he'd done it for his own peace of mind. The man, who had a 1998 conviction for harassment on his record, admitted stalking and was given a 12-month community sentence and an electronically monitored 12-week night curfew. He was also ordered to perform rehabilitation activities and banned from contacting Gervil for at least a year. The doctor expressed disappointment regarding his punishment, as it hadn't taken into account the serious distress the incident had caused her. Gervil lost 80% of her hair from stress-related alopecia, was diagnosed with PTSD, and couldn't work for months. Before we move on to number 1, be sure to stay tuned afterwards if you haven't seen When Dentists Go Wrong yet, and you want to satisfy your crime TV cravings some more. Number 1. Dinello James, Berta. In July of 2018, former child actor Dennis Day disappeared from his home in Phoenix, Oregon, and for 9 months, his condition remained unknown. The 76-year-old was a founding cast member on the first 2 seasons of Walt Disney's Mickey Mouse Club TV series in the 1950s. At the time of Day's disappearance, his 88-year-old husband, Henry Ernest Caswell, a dementia sufferer, had been hospitalized after suffering a series of falls. He remained in an assisted living facility and died in September. Once Day was reported missing, the police conducted several separate searches of his 1,800-square-foot home, as neighbors had complained that a foul smell was coming from it. The searches didn't produce any results. It wouldn't be until early April of 2019, after the story had become national news, that badly decomposed human remains, which were subsequently confirmed as Days, were found on the property. Local law enforcement didn't elaborate on how the previous searches had failed to uncover his corpse. On July the 5th of 2019, Oregon State Police arrested 36-year-old Dinello James, Berta, in connection to Day's death. He'd been living with the couple while working for them as a handyman. On July the 15th of 2018, Day had visited a friend and told him that he wanted to go to the police station because Berta had hurt him. The station was closed that evening, so they made plans to go the following morning, but Day didn't show up and was never seen alive again. When he was initially interviewed, Berta stated that the elderly man had told him he was going to visit some friends and that he'd return in a few days. He was reportedly observed on body camera footage exhibiting obvious battle wounds on his hands and forearms. Less than a week after Day was reported missing, the former Mouseketeers Ford Escort was found in the possession of 2 women, Lori DeClusin and Wanda Garcia, about 200 miles away from his home in Coos County. DeClusin claimed that Day had given them permission to use the vehicle, but months later admitted that she'd acquired it after going to Day's home with Berta. She and Garcia had become concerned by the latter's erratic behavior, as he was allegedly under the influence of methamphetamine and fled in the Escort. They were charged with 1 count of unauthorized use of a vehicle. With Berta in custody, prosecutors argued that he'd shoved Day to the ground during an argument and then took no further action to prevent his death. He hid his body under a pile of clothes, where it was discovered months later with the aid of cadaver dogs. The 2 men had reportedly had several altercations because Day didn't want the handyman to live at the property anymore. Berta's charges included manslaughter, criminally negligent homicide, and identity theft. He pleaded not guilty. His case was ongoing as of the latest updates, as was a lawsuit filed by Day's family against Phoenix law enforcement, accusing them of negligence. The suit claimed that they'd falsely reported to have brought cadaver dogs to the house during their initial searches, and that officers unknowingly stepped on Day's dead body, causing fractures. Those aspects, enhanced by the severe decomposition of the corpse, were considered as highly detrimental to the criminal case against Berta. Number 7. Lawrence Rudolph. Pennsylvania dentist Lawrence Rudolph went on a hunting trip to Zambia with his wife Bianca in October of 2016. They were both described as avid hunters, and it was mentioned in later reports that they'd gone on the African safari so that Bianca would have the opportunity to kill a leopard. On the morning of October the 11th, a group of the safari's gamekeepers and scouts heard the sound of a gunshot coming from the Rudolph's cabin. Upon investigating the noise, they reportedly came upon Bianca's lifeless body lying on the ground after she'd suffered a gunshot wound to the chest. Her husband told the gamekeepers that he was in the bathroom when he heard Bianca's Browning 12-gauge shotgun discharge. Rudolph repeated the narrative while being questioned by local police. Zambian authorities believed his version of events, through which the dentist maintained that his wife had accidentally shot herself while packing up for their day of hunting. Rudolph was thus allowed to travel back to the United States, at which point he resumed his relationship with an unidentified mistress whom he'd allegedly been dating for years. In the weeks following his wife's untimely death, Rudolph claimed 7 payouts from life insurance policies he'd taken out with multiple different companies in various states. In total, the dentist received approximately $4.8 million as a result of Bianca's passing. The FBI revealed the potentially inculpatory aspect that Rudolph had met up with another romantic partner of his in Las Vegas the day after his wife's funeral. 3 years later, investigators learned that one of the employees at Rudolph's dental practice had told her co-workers that she'd been in a secret relationship with the man for nearly 2 decades. She'd also disclosed that she'd given Rudolph an ultimatum to leave his wife in the months leading up to her death in December of 2021. The dentist was arrested in Cabo San Lucas following the culmination of a 5-year investigation by the FBI. Rudolph was formally charged with foreign murder and wire fraud for allegedly gunning down his wife in order to cash out her life insurance policies and continue his relationship with his long-time mistress. Number 6. Scott Shamoli. After Scott Shamoli had sold Jackson Family Dentistry in 2019, the practice's new owner quickly realized that something wasn't right about the business's records. According to Shamoli's files, the dentist, who operated out of Grafton, Wisconsin, had performed more than 30 crown procedures for every 100 patients, an exorbitant rate that reportedly exceeded the state average roughly 5-fold. The new business owner reported the suspiciously high numbers to the authorities, prompting an extensive investigation into Shamoli's activities while at the helm of Jackson Family Dentistry. It subsequently emerged that the former dentist had regularly falsified his patients' medical records and X-ray results in order to convince them that they needed unnecessary tooth fillings. In many cases, 61-year-old Shamoli had intentionally damaged or drilled holes in his patients' teeth so that he could charge them considerable fees to repair them. The Washington Post reported that during a 20-month period from January of 2018 to August of 2019, Shamoli had performed over 1,600 fraudulent crown installations, which brought in millions of dollars to his practice. By the end of 2020, the dentist had an estimated net worth of $6.8 million, largely due to the money he'd obtained through his predatory and deceptive scheme. In March of 2022, it was reported that Shamoli had been convicted on 5 counts of healthcare fraud and 2 counts of making a false statement. He also became the subject of a malpractice lawsuit filed by nearly 100 of his former patients. The civil litigation was reportedly put on hold pending Shamoli's criminal sentencing, which was scheduled for June of 2022. Number 5. Harley Rodriguez Bonilla. On February the 21st of 2020, undercover officers in Texas made an appointment to see a dentist named Harley Rodriguez Bonilla, who was suspected of operating his practice without a license. Consequently, an investigator posing as a customer went to Rodriguez Bonilla's office, which was located inside the man's townhome. The officer waited in the living room until an assistant took them upstairs. The 41-year-old dentist had reportedly outfitted one of his bedrooms with an array of professional dental equipment and an examination table. Shortly after the sting operation, which had been disguised as an appointment for one of the officers to get a set of dentures fitted, Rodriguez Bonilla was taken into custody and charged with practicing unlicensed dentistry. Investigators spoke with one of the man's patients, who claimed to have been charged $3,800 for the fitting of upper and lower veneers. Once in police custody, Rodriguez Bonilla confessed to also performing unlicensed dental work in California and Florida. His bond was reportedly set at $25,000. Number 4. Donald Dinello Jr. In March of 2013, it was reported that Donald Dinello Jr., a dentist at Oral Surgery Associates in Dauphin County, Pennsylvania, had been taken into the custody of state narcotics agents. The 45-year-old's arrest followed an extensive investigation by the state attorney general's office. A grand jury ultimately determined that Dinello had forged prescriptions for various narcotic substances and stolen thousands of dollars from his own dental practice without his business partner's knowledge. Between 2008 and 2012, the dentist had written at least 88 fraudulent pain medication prescriptions for fictitious patients. In actuality, Dinello allegedly abused the powerful drugs himself, which was why he'd neglected to record the scripts as required by law. Furthermore, Dinello was accused of stealing dental supplies from Oral Surgery Associates, which he then sold at a discount rate to another dental office where he'd secretly been working. The grand jury found that the duplicitous dentist had deposited roughly $55,000 of the proceeds from his dental supply sales into his personal bank accounts. Upon his arrest, Dinello was charged with several offenses, including falsely prescribing a controlled substance and theft. In July of 2014, he was sentenced to 15 to 30 months in county prison, while also being ordered to pay approximately $84,000 in restitution to his former business partner. Number 3. Robert Hofstetter. New Jersey dentist Robert Hofstetter, aged 69, was arrested in 2018 after a female employee discovered a camera hidden inside the restroom at his office in Sewell. The man had reportedly placed a miniature pinhole camera in a cardboard box that was positioned on a shelf in the bathroom. Hofstetter was alleged to have used a concealed recording device to capture photographs of unknown subjects whose intimate parts were exposed. The unnamed woman who'd found the camera was accompanied by several other of the dental office's female employees when she reported her unnerving discovery to local police. After his criminal practices were brought to light, Hofstetter was charged with invasion of privacy, an offense which carries a maximum sentence of 1 year in jail and a $2,500 fine. When news of the incident was circulated online, many were quick to point out some of the darkly ironic statements on Hofstetter's website, which touted that his office had been equipped with state-of-the-art technology without sacrificing a warm and inviting atmosphere. Number 2. Daniel Jacoby. On October the 10th of 2017, an elderly woman was found unconscious inside her home in Beverly Hills, California by her 2 adult children. Following the arrival of emergency responders, the homeowner was pronounced dead at the scene. An autopsy subsequently determined that she'd been killed by way of strangulation. The Beverly Hills Police Department launched an investigation into the matter, which led them to conclude that the victim's son, 36-year-old Daniel Jacoby, had been responsible for the murder. Although it wasn't revealed what had specifically led to Jacoby being identified as a suspect, the police did indicate that they'd relied on a combination of physical and digital evidence to make their determination. Jacoby, a prominent Southern California dentist who treated a number of celebrity patients in the past, had uploaded a commemorative Facebook post in the wake of his mother's death with the caption that read in part, "Mum, I love you and miss you dearly." On February the 12th of 2018, the man was arrested and formally charged with murder. According to the findings of the police's investigation, Jacoby had fatally strangled his mother within 24 hours of the emergency services being called to her home. It was reported that the dentist's motive for committing the murder was financial in nature. During his arraignment, Jacoby entered a plea of not guilty, and he was held in custody without bond while awaiting his trial. Number 1. James Ryan. A dental surgeon from Montgomery County, Maryland, was arrested by local police as he walked into work at Evolution Oral Surgery in Germantown on March the 22nd of 2022. During a press conference later that day, the authorities detailed how they'd uncovered evidence that Dr. James Ryan had been directly involved in the death of his girlfriend and former patient, Sarah Harris. The latter had passed away on January the 26th after overdosing on prescription drugs that Ryan had provided. The two had first met when 25-year-old Harris went to Evolution Oral Surgery in order to have her wisdom teeth removed. Following the surgical procedure, Ryan had offered her a job, and shortly thereafter, they started dating. Detectives recovered text messages shared between the couple that ultimately proved vital in their effort to understand what had precipitated the young woman's untimely passing. Investigators found several phone conversations in which Harris had asked for various medications, including ketamine, diazepam, and propofol, none of which she had a legitimate medical reason for using. Ryan not only gave her the drugs she'd requested, but also allegedly instructed her on how to use them properly and even increased the potency of their effects. The police reported that Harris had been living with Ryan at his home in Clarksburg, and it was also gleaned from their text messages that the young woman had overdosed on another occasion prior to her death. Ryan was ultimately charged with 10 counts, including second-degree murder, and he was held in custody without bond while awaiting his case's legal proceedings. Thanks for watching. Only using knowledge acquired from YouTube videos. Would you rather build a house for your parents or survive 10 days in the jungle? Let us know in the comments section below.